Hello, everybody. So this is going to be a quick video over self-regulation. All right. So first, what is self-regulation? So self-regulation is any time that you're controlling yourself. So you can think of self-regulation in probably the smallest way we control ourselves, that we regulate ourselves, is through self-control, which self-control specifically refers to when we're trying to inhibit an impulse. All right, so you see a piece of chocolate cake sitting on your kitchen counter, and you are tempted to eat it, and you resist that temptation. That's self-control, right? You have an impulse to eat the chocolate cake, and you are stopping it. Okay, that's self-control. But self-regulation includes not only self-control, but can include even long-term things like goal pursuit. All right, so are you so if you go to college, you pursue a degree, right? The navigating certain goals, selecting which activities to participate in and which not to, choosing how to spend your time versus, do you spend time studying or going out with your friends? Do you spend time, can you spend time with your friends, at certain times, depending on how much work you have? It's all of that. If you are working towards an end state, if you are having to guide your behavior in some way, we're talking about self-regulation. Now, in general, there are two kinds of self-regulation. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint slides. Hold on one second. To help us out with that. All right. So in general, we have two kinds of self-regulation. You have proactive self-control. This is doing things ahead of time to prevent unwanted behaviors. All right. So or setting up rules ahead of time to increase the chances of doing what you want to do rather than what you might be tempted to do at a later time. All right. So that's proactive self-control. You're doing something ahead of time. But you also have reactive self-control, which is trying to exert self-control when you're faced with a temptation. All right? And so, two models that have been used that I'm going to talk about today as examples of each are the control readiness model of self-control. Now, that's a proactive model. That is a model of proactive self-control, and the strength model of self-control, or the resource model of self-control. It's the same thing. I suppose there are certain differences in their predictions, but so we'll try to stick to the resource model of self-control. That is a model of reactive self-control. So we're going to talk about each of those today. So first, we're going to talk about the control readiness model. Now, the control readiness model argues that if you engage in an initial active self-control, that essentially puts you in a self-control frame of mind. That makes it easier for you to engage in self-control later down the line because you're already in the practice. You're already ready to engage in cognitive control. So the control readiness model, or the cognitive control model, all right, you engage in an initial act of control that gets you ready for later acts of control. All right. So that's proactive, right? So you engage in an initial act. It's like if you get up and go to the gym in the morning, other things throughout the rest of the day are a little bit easier to do because you're already in the frame of mind of controlling yourself. Okay. A model of reactive self-control is the strength model, or I'm going to just change this to the resource model of self-control. Now, the resource model of self-control argues that we have limited resources with which to control ourselves. And if anything depletes those resources, then controlling ourselves, engaging in self-control, becomes harder. All right. So when those resources are depleted, we get what's called an ego depletion effect. All right. And a lot of things can deplete it. So engaging in a first act of self-control is thought to deplete it because you need that resource to engage in self-control, and it depletes it. So, if you're keeping yourself from eating a scrumptious looking chocolate chip cookie, it's going to be harder for you to later go to the gym. All right, even if you succeeded, and I don't mean much later, I mean immediately after, go to the gym. Because that initial act of self-control, according to the resource model, drains some of your self-control resources. Now, the thing about this, though, is that the resource model of self-control is typically only predicts your ability to control yourself when you're fatigued. When you're rested, perhaps because the resources are so numerous that an initial act of self-control or something, or making a decision or something like that doesn't deplete it much, and so you have a plethora of control resources to use. Maybe that's why, we don't know. But we do know that you're only going to see that ego depletion effect, which you engage in self-control and it makes a subsequent act of control harder. You're only going to see that ego depletion effect when you're already tired. All right. If you're rested, you probably aren't going to see it. And there you go. All right. There's two models predicting two different kinds of self-control. You got the control readiness model for proactive self-control, and you've got the resource model of self-control for reactive self-regulation. All right, guys, that's it for this video. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great one.